Welcome to another devlog for Eyes of the Sky. It's been a while since my last update here on the channel. Development on the game has been going well. We finished a new fully featured level which is finally out of the blockout state. It has a cool Japanese influence aesthetic and requires the player to traverse on roofs and indoors to reach all the hidden secrets. There's a new anime style model for the main character, fully rigged with some nice new animations on the way. We have a couple of new levels in the blockout stage as well, and even a few music tracks on the way. We also had a big playtest recently, and I'm still going through all the feedback that I got from it, but the response has been pretty positive. If you're interested in playtesting as well, definitely stick around to the end of the video and wishlist the game on Steam to see when we open our next playtest. I've spent quite a few devlogs now just explaining every mechanic in the game and why I designed it that way, but I didn't give much thought to how accessible these mechanics are. Sure, I'm good at the game, but I made it. I know everything about it, except for some bugs here and there. But the average player I give the game to will obviously need some explanation. And spoilers, a lot of players who tried the game found it really hard to learn at first. Eyes of the Sky is a hack and slash game inspired by games like Kingdom Hearts and Devil May Cry, and unless already familiar with this genre, players often had trouble wrapping their head around the game and using the large amount of tools it had to offer. Instead, they often resorted to using just a few options that worked well for them and forgetting about the rest. In this devlog, I'll share how I attempted to teach players about the mechanics of the game in a non-intrusive way. Although still a work in progress, I think what I ended up with is a fair balance between intrusive and informative. If we look at the purely informative and non-intrusive end of the spectrum, we get something like what I did at first, which was a simple help section in the game's main menu. I kind of rushed it just to get the playtest out there because getting feedback was more important to me. So the help section was just a bunch of written tips on how to play the game, some basic controls and a moveset. Not the best way to teach my game, but it was enough for experienced players, which is where I aimed my first playtest. But as I started to broaden the skill level of my playtesters, I noticed it took more explanation and that the help section wasn't involving enough. This meant it was time for a tutorial. I had a lot of different mechanics in the game and I wanted the tutorial to cover all of them. That way, I thought, playtesters could easily start playing the game with little confusion. I wanted the tutorial to be applicable to a wide range of playtesters with different skill levels and also cover everything from the basics of movement and platforming to combat, aerial combos, and form changes. To teach movement and platforming, I didn't use any prompts. Instead, I just set up a simple platforming challenge with two big platforms the player needs to jump between. If they fall, they can just climb back up, which also teaches them how to grab ledges. After that, I introduced the player to combat by using some passive enemy. I used a goal system that is displayed to the player along with some prompts to help guide them. They need to do ground and aerial combos a few times before they can progress. Same with using spells and combos. Once the player had mastered that, I faced them with an enemy that attacks every few seconds so that they can get a handle on dodging and guarding. By now we had quite a few enemies die and drop some orbs, so I teach the player how to collect them and use them to trigger the overcharge state and cast a powerful spell. After that, I faced them with some platforming challenges, which should teach them how to use their double jump and air dash to traverse the world. This is where players tended to have the most trouble and where I took some time to adjust the feel of platforming and movement. For the form change tutorial, I started with just the melee form to keep things simple and teach the player how to collect tokens and perform finishers. By the way, if you are a new viewer and you want to understand how the form system works, you can watch my previous devlog on the subject where I explain all about it. Finally, I unlocked 2 more forms and let the player experiment freely with some more enemies, letting them fill out the system for themselves. I took this tutorial to playtesting and the responses were mixed. It turned out this went too far in the intrusive direction. While effective in teaching the mechanics, unexperienced players found the tutorial itself hard and overwhelming. Too much was being taught at once, and it was hard for them to follow along and get to the end. On the flip side, experienced players found it needlessly long. They often preferred to skip it entirely and figure things out for themselves. This meant I had to go back to the drawing board. I realized that most likely starting the players off with every ability was overwhelming. I needed to pace the learning out over a longer period of time. Pace properly across the game instead of all at once. So I had to step back and reconsider. What abilities did I want the player to start with? How should the game even start? I have most of the story written already, but how do I integrate it into the game? It was enough to really stump me for a long time. So much that I focused on other things simply so that I could make progress. But eventually, with some help and consultation from some really smart people, I figured it out. I wanted the player to start with nothing. The story behind the game is about a spell sword who loses their memory and slowly regains it throughout the game. So it only made sense that the player would only be able to move and jump until the main character remembered how to fight. With that in mind, I set out to build the first level, with the intent that it would introduce the most basic elements of the combat system. And of course, I also set out to integrate it with the game's story. So I started out with some basic platforming that doesn't require double jumping or air dashing, just like I did with the first tutorial. Then I used the same goal-oriented system to teach the player how to do basic combos, aerial combos, and so on. And I paced it out, placing some more platforming challenges and small cutscenes between the combat portions to break up the flow. This also had the benefit of setting the tone of the game. It's going to be a mix of action and storytelling, and I wanted that to be clear to the player from the very start. Finally, I give the player their first spell and open the level up a bit, introducing the exploration flow of the game by giving them a small collection side quest, while also scattering the map with some basic encounters for them to fight. Completing the collection side quest will reward the player with an optional cutscene, which also sets a precedent. The reward for exploration is more details about the story and more character interactions, as well as more resources to level up. Finally, I placed the boss at the end, a wild boar, which seemed fitting for the forest aesthetic that I planned for this level. I also wanted the boar specifically because I wanted it to have an attack where it charged at the player. This seemed like a good way of teaching the player about the importance of dodging or guarding a boss's attacks before attacking them. To further reinforce that, I made it so that if you dodge the boar's attacks, you get a sizable window to damage it. But if you specifically guard the charge attack, the boar will get dazed. Then you have even more time to work on it. Overall, I thought that this level flow was good for teaching the basics to the player without overdoing it like the previous tutorial. After all, this addresses all the issues from the previous tutorial, right? I took my game to another playtesting event to see the responses. Well, no. Turns out, players still disliked the tutorial even in this smaller level. So, what was it that annoyed players? What was so bad about the tutorial? Turns out it was the goal-oriented system all along. I saw this system in use in a few other games. I don't even remember where, but it made sense to me. You need to make sure that the player understands the mechanics, so you force them to perform the mechanic properly a few times to progress. Like, for example, do 3 melee combos to progress, or do 3 aerial combos. Turns out a few players really disliked this, especially as it gated progress and was unskippable. On the flip side, a few players did not fully understand how to do some of the more advanced inputs and mechanics and needed more explanation, causing them to get stuck and become frustrated with the game. I took some more time to do research about how other games handle this issue, and I came up with a different method. I reworked the tutorial sections to use a pop-up UI that had a long text explanation on how to perform the needed action, for example, how to perform a launcher. I also included a nice moving GIF to show the desired result that the player should expect. And, most importantly, I added a skip button so that they can ignore the tutorial if they wanted to. After the player closes the pop-up, they will still see small tip indicators reminding them of the inputs that they need to do. If they do them, they receive visual indications that they did it right. But these don't gate progress anymore, and if the player defeats all the enemies without performing those actions, they can still progress. This is the version I included in my latest playtest, which was sent out to players of all skill levels. The response seems largely more positive. Although some players commented that they want a more involved tutorial, I still think that I struck a decent balance for now. If you'd also like to help me playtest, I would happily accept feedback when I open the next wave of playtesting. So if you want to try this out and give me feedback about the tutorial flow or about anything else related to the game, all you need to do is wishlist the game on Steam and keep up to date with the status on Twitter. If you enjoyed this devlog and found it interesting, like the video and subscribe. Thank you all for watching.